Sunday, January 21st, 2007.
In violent sports, blows to the head, brain trauma.
It's like being in a car wreck every day.
Can cause athletes to suffer hormone deficiencies affecting their play.
Issues with strength, issues with memory, with focus.
HGH is one remedy, but while it's banned by the NFL, the league does not test for it.
Unless you find a test for it, players in all sports are going to be using it.
Using it or abusing it?
Both.
Also today, she's more than Tom Benson's granddaughter. Rita Benson is his heir apparent, increasingly the public face of the Saints.
The area and the team can thrive together, but it's going to take a lot of work.
Today outside the lines, the woman in charge of the most incredible story in sports and the ultimate irony, why athletes may need a banned substance.
And now, reporting for Outside the Lines, Bob Lee.
Just 3 days ago, we learned of the medical conclusion that the multiple on-field concussions suffered by former NFL safety Andre Waters led to his depression and his suicide in November. Now, today we learned of another danger from brain trauma for athletes, one that's as ironic as insidious. At a time when all sports are drug testing more stringently than ever, the very violence of these sports can cause athletes' bodies to stop producing testosterone or growth hormone, and so athletes need to add these substances that are banned. Tom Ferry of ESPN, the magazine, explains this dilemma.
Head trauma is a fact of life in contact sports, such as football and boxing.
How does it feel to be hit in the head really hard?
Oh, man. Well, when you first get hit, you see a big black spot, and then the pain hits you. After I get done with the fight, I'm like, damn, do I really want to do this? Is this the career I really want to choose?
For 19 years, boxer James Toney has continued to return to the ring, where he's won 4 world titles from middleweight to heavyweight. But along the way, he also may have suffered an injury that doctors only now are beginning to understand. It involves the impact of head trauma on the pituitary gland, a pea-sized organ that secretes many of the body's most important hormones.
The pituitary gland sits at the base of the skull. It sits directly behind the eyes and right in the midline behind the nose and the nasal cavity.
UCLA neurosurgeon Dan Kelly is one of the leading researchers in the emerging area of pituitary injuries.
So when someone has a head injury, the brain, we know, moves around within the skull, and there can be stretching of the pituitary stalk, or there can be direct damage to the pituitary gland.
Damage to that so-called master gland can lead to deficiencies in critical hormones that affect everyday energy levels and such processes as the healing of muscles and bones.
Which hormones are you low in, and how low are you?
They said my testosterone level's real low, like damn near non-existent.
Now that's a strange thing to hear from a boxer.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're in the testosterone sport.
Yeah, but see, I was shocked when Dr. Gordon told me. I was like, oh my God, are you serious?
I was always amazed at his hormone levels being that of a 60 and 70-year-old.
Mark Gordon is the personal physician to Toney, as well as several retired NFL athletes. He showed Outside the Lines the results from a basic blood test taken in March 2005, a month before Toney's championship bout against heavyweight John Ruiz. The results of that test suggest the then 36-year-old boxer was not only low in testosterone, but in the chemical IGF-1, a commonly used marker for growth hormone. A more rigorous follow-up test to confirm the initial findings was not performed.
I needed to check other aspects because of inability to lose weight, issues with strength, issues with memory, with focus.
In a 2004 preliminary study, researchers in Turkey found growth hormone deficiency in 45% of boxers. This month, those same researchers published a study that found deficits of the same hormone in 23% of kickboxers, a rate still many times higher than the general population.
From The results of these studies would suggest that there's an ongoing damage to the pituitary gland that at this point I really don't think people are paying much attention to.
Should they?
I think it certainly should be looked at.
In fact, one NFL-funded study comparing boxing to football found that the collisions on any given Sunday can be more devastating than any punch delivered in a ring. So far this season, 56 players had concussions or head injuries, and teams rarely, if ever, check for pituitary damage.
Everybody's bigger, faster, stronger, and it's like being in a car wreck every day.
Brad Leggett played center for the New Orleans Saints in the early 1990s. He followed his father, former defensive lineman and coach Earl Leggett, into the NFL. But he was forced to retire after 4 years when a back injury failed to heal. Leggett says he tried painkillers, chiropractors, and acupuncture for relief. Nothing worked. Finally, 7 years ago, he took a test that he says suggested deficiencies in testosterone and growth hormone. That's when he started using replacement doses, as prescribed and monitored by Gordon.
Within a month, I just noticed that I felt like I had more energy, and I felt like I was able to, to go out and start exercising and doing things I haven't done for years.
Are other NFL players doing this as well, former NFL players?
I know of quite a few, and when they're on it, they can play with their kids and do things. When they're off it, man, they're in misery.
This raises questions for leagues and sport commissions. Should they start checking active players for pituitary dysfunction? And when a medical condition is found, what remedies, if any, should be allowed?
I do believe that when somebody is injured, that hormone replacement therapy it can do nothing but help that person not only recover, but recover where he was healthier than he was before. And those are the things that I think that the NFL should really look at.
It's perceived as being undue advantage or doping. Well, what do you do with someone who has, because of their sport, a deficiency or an injury? Should they or should they not be allowed to have that hormone replaced to a level that's physiologic?
In boxing, steroid use is banned in the states where most major fights are held. There are no medical exemptions.
What can you do within the rules of boxing to address your hormone levels?
Well, one thing I think they should allow me to do is go get a prescription. But with the current state of sports right now, with the baseball players and football players getting caught and doing all kind of crazy stuff, I guess I can't do much about it because if I take something, boom, I'm a cheat.
Toney's already been called as much. He had to forfeit his victory over Ruiz that gained him the heavyweight title after he failed a post-fight drug test. He admits using the banned steroid nandrolone, but he insists it was only for a brief period 6 months earlier while recovering from arm surgery.
The idea was to help him heal better than what was anticipated in the standard practice of medicine.
Aren't steroids dangerous? Isn't growth hormone dangerous?
An analogy that I use when I get this question asked is if you have a sip of wine, what's the likelihood of you getting into your car and having an accident versus drinking an entire bottle of wine, getting into your car and having an accident?
What we're talking about here is replacing to the normal physiological level in someone who's deficient. So we're taking them from down here and getting them back up to where they should be.
In an email to ESPN, NFL spokesman Greg Aiello said the league isn't yet convinced that head trauma in football causes a loss of hormones. But he said the NFL does allow a small number of players to use testosterone to address health needs from testicular disease. No waivers have been requested for human growth hormone, for which none of the pro leagues currently test.
I think it would be pretty naive to think that NFL players are not using growth hormone currently.
You have to absolutely establish within the organized sports, whether or not it's boxing or football or whatever, to establish the guidelines for it.
Unless you find a test for it, players in all sports are going to be using it.
Using it or abusing it?
Both.
Leggett, in retirement, considers his a case of use. He thinks of his father and his quality of life.
2 artificial knees, 2 artificial shoulder, elbow surgery, ankle surgeries, carpal tunnel. I don't want to live like my father. I want to be able to do what I want, when I want, and not be in the pain that he's in every single day.
Tom Ferry of ESPN, the magazine. The need for HGH because of brain trauma. Pat Harlow can speak to that in the first person. He was the 11th player taken in the 1991 NFL Draft. He played 8 seasons in the league on offensive tackle with the Pats and with the Raiders, and for the past 3 years he has been prescribed human growth hormone during his retirement. Pat, during your playing career, how many concussions do you believe you suffered?
You know, Bob, I can't really be sure of the number. I would say if you were going to take my high school, college, and pro career, I would say it's got to easily be in the double digits. It's one of those things that sometimes you get dinged, you don't tell anybody about it.
So you're not even sure?
I'm not sure.
Just as we move forward and talk about your HGH use now, let's establish, during your playing career, did you take steroids or HGH during your time in the NFL?
You know, I was so afraid of the drug policy getting caught that it kept me away from it.
What do you believe of a correlation between the number of concussions, which you believe well up into double figures, between your number of concussions and your hormone deficiency?
Well, you know what? I don't have any reason I don't know why my hormones are low. I know that when I got tested, they were very low. They were very, very low. And that's one explanation for the drop in my levels.
So you've been prescribed by a physician for the past 3 years.
Yes.
What was your problem, and how did HGH help you?
Well, you know what? First of all, HGH is not a cure-all. I still have, I've had pretty bad back surgeries that still bothers me to this day. What the HGH has done for me is helped me get through the other little aches and pains that I didn't have like major problems with, say my shoulders or my right knee and my ankles and those things that were hurting me, that I've maybe had some minor stuff done on, but were preventing me from having an active, normal life.
Now, you heard the speculation in the piece that absent testing, and yet WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, has a blood test for HGH. It's questionable whether the union would ever allow it, NFL Players Union, because it's blood testing invasive. But absent testing, do you believe, as you heard the speculation in the piece, that players in the league now are using?
I think there are some players definitely using. I don't think it's rampant by any means. And again, what I'm talking about is replacing myself to normal levels. And the problem with players and athletes of all sports is that a lot of times we have this desire to push it beyond the limit, and that's when it becomes an abuse problem.
So how feasible do you think it would be to administrate what they call a therapeutic use exemption for people who are playing like yourself, who have a naturally low hormone level because of whatever reason, at the same time with guys that were looking for that advantage? How could you administrate a policy like that? Well,
I think if you made everybody every year that they come in do a simple blood test and find out what everybody's levels are, and then if you recheck those levels and say, hey, they're way out of the norm for your age or your body type, then it's a pretty easy test. Say, well, this guy's obviously abusing. It's kind of what they do with even with this testosterone test. They check levels, and if the levels are out of whack, that's when you get popped.
Yeah, it would be a blood test. That would be a tough sell for the union. That's to be determined. Pat Harlow, we appreciate your time. Best of luck.
Thanks, Bob.
And you can read more on this issue in the current edition of ESPN, the magazine. Tom Ferry's article is entitled, "The Case for HGH." Check it out. Next, the woman who has become the face of the Saints in New Orleans in their most trying time.
She needed to be out there in the public saying, hey, we're back. We need your help. We can do this together. The team wants to be here, and I think she's done a good job of presenting that.
She's the granddaughter of owner Tom Benson, also an owner now of the Saints, and she's brought a lot to this franchise. We'll talk about it next.